The sound of heavy rain hitting a metal roof is usually brilliant when you're tucked up inside, but in late 2002, Capcom managed to turn that exact noise into pure high-speed anxiety. We had just survived the Arklay Mountains, and the natural assumption was that whatever came next would follow a familiar, slow, methodical pace. Resident Evil Zero ripped that expectation up immediately. It didn't just put us in a quiet dining room with a ticking clock. It threw us straight onto the Ecliptic Express, a luxury train tearing through the forest in the dead of night, completely overrun by something entirely new. Right from the opening cinematic, it was clear the GameCube was flexing its muscles. The sheer technical detail of this game is still staggering to look at today. You had water lashing against the glass and realistic transparency, the narrow carriages constantly rocking back and forth, and the shadows shifting dynamically as the train sped through the storm. It was claustrophobic in a completely different way than the series was used to. You weren't just trapped in a house, you were trapped in a metal tube hurtling towards a crash site, and the things waiting inside were a massive escalation. That first proper encounter is buried into my memory. You walk into a seemingly empty passenger car, expecting a standard shambling corpse, and instead, a pile of black, glistering sludge on the floor starts to bubble. It slowly pulls itself up towards the shape of an old man, accompanied by this horrific screeching music that signals you are completely out of your depth. The Leech Man wasn't something you could just drop with a few lucky handgun bullets. It undulated, it stretched, and it forced an immediate panic. It was a clear message from the developers that the rules of engagement had changed. This was the prequel. The training wheels were off. The enemies were messy biological prototypes, and you were no longer a lone survivor trying to escape. You were suddenly part of a duo, trying to stop a runaway train before it derailed into Umbrella's darkest secrets. It's a game of incredible ambition, stunning visuals, and deeply frustrating mechanics, and it all kicks off with one of the most intense opening hours in survival horror history. Let's talk about the beautiful, punishing nightmare that is Resident Evil Zero.
First general manager, Dr. James Marcus.
It began as a simple investigation of some bizarre murders in the suburbs of Raccoon City. Nothing in our training could ever have prepared us for the nightmare that ensued. We never stood a chance.
The biggest shock of Resident Evil Zero wasn't the graphics, it was the fact that for the first time, you weren't suffering alone. The transition into this sequel came with a fundamental shift in how the game actually played. You were no longer relying purely on your own spatial awareness and survival instincts. You were managing a duo. The partner zapping system took the classic horror of isolation and replaced it with the relentless grinding anxiety of babysitting. Instead of picking between two characters at the start and playing through their specific campaign, you were forced to control Rebecca Chambers and Billy Coen simultaneously, and they weren't just reskins of each other. They were designed with mechanical friction in mind. Billy is your tank. He can take a solid beating, pushing heavy crates, and actually holding his own in a firefight. Rebecca, on the other hand, is the only one who can mix green herbs and handle chemical puzzles. But if a zombie so much as looks at her aggressively, she's instantly limping in the red. This forced cooperation meant you were constantly splitting the team up to solve dual-track puzzles. You'd send Rebecca crawling through a narrow service shaft to flip a switch, leaving Billy standing in a dining car surrounded by shattered glass. Suddenly, the tension didn't just come from what was waiting behind the door. It came from the realisation that you'd left your partner alone in a room with a prototype monster and only half a magazine of handgun ammo. It completely broke the invincible backup safety that we were used to. When Barry Burton kicked open the door in 1996, you could breathe a sigh of relief. In Zero, your backup was entirely your responsibility. If either Billy or Rebecca died, you were staring at a game over screen. It turned every single hallway into a tactical negotiation. You had to constantly pause and decide who was holding the heavy weapons, who was carrying the medical supplies, and who was going to walk into the dark first. It was a massive ambitious leap into the complexity of the survival horror formula, but as anyone who had played it knows, that ambition came with a crushing logistical tax that effectively broke the game's pacing.
It's gonna be dangerous from here on in. Why don't we cooperate?
Cooperate with you?
Listen, little girl, if you haven't noticed, there's some pretty freaked out things on this train. And I, for one, want to get out of here. I don't think we stand a chance doing it alone.
You expect me to trust you, a wanted felon? I don't need your help. I can handle this on my own. And don't call me little girl.
For years, the magic item box was the ultimate sanctuary for survival horror fans. It was a completely illogical mechanic, a trans-dimensional chest where a green herb stashed in a basement would miraculously appear in an attic, but we all accepted it because it kept the game moving. In Resident Evil 0, Capcom decided it was time for a heavy dose of realism. They killed the item box. In its place, they gave us the ability to simply drop items anywhere on the floor. On paper, that sounds liberating. In practice, it turned a tense horror game into a moving day simulator. Because you were managing two characters, each with only two tiny inventory slots, and keeping in mind that heavier weapons like the shotgun took up two of those spaces, you were constantly forced to make agonising decisions about what to leave behind. And then there was the hookshot, the absolute bane of my 12-year-old existence. A puzzle item that took up a massive chunk of your inventory, which the game expected you to lug around for hours just in case you needed it to randomly grapple up to a higher floor. The reality of this new system meant that the floor of every main hall quickly devolved into a clutter mess of discarded ammunition, half-mixed herbs and ink ribbons. You weren't just fighting monsters, you were fighting your own hoarding habits. It added a layer of logistical friction that fundamentally broke the momentum of the story. You'd barely survive a brutal encounter, figure out exactly where you needed to go next, and then realise the specific key item you needed was sitting on a rug 3 floors down and 4 rooms over. The horror quickly stopped being about the zombies and started being about the backtracking tax. You spent hours retracing your steps through completely empty, cleared out hallways just to retrieve a piece of equipment you couldn't fit in your pockets 20 minutes ago. It was a brutal, uncompromising drain on your time that prioritised realism over actually having fun.
This is Officer Chambers from STARS Bravo team. Please identify yourself. Is someone there?
The government has announced that it has set out to out farmers. But as of 2 years ago, when a similar plan was set up, the local government stepped in and took over.
If you grew up playing the earlier games, your lasting memory of Rebecca Chambers is probably her hiding in a save room, or needing Chris to frantically run across the mansion to rescue her from a hunter. She always felt like the quite essential, out-of-her-depth rookie, but Resident Evil 0 completely recontextualises her entire existence in the franchise. This game gives us her true origin story, and when you actually look at the timeline of what she goes through, you realise she might secretly be one of the toughest characters in the entire series. Think about it, 18 years old, she's a medic, fresh out of training, and her very first field assignment involves a derailed train, giant flesh-eating leeches, and a corporate conspiracy spearheaded by a resurrected opera-singing scientist. She isn't a hardened combat veteran. She's basically a teenager thrust into a biological meat grinder. The game mechanically enforces this vulnerability too. Her health pool is tiny compared to Billy's, and she gets thrown across the room by attacks that he would normally just brush off. You are forced to play her with a level of caution that perfectly matches her rookie status, yet despite being completely outgunned, she is the intellectual anchor of the team. She's the only one who can mix the necessary chemicals, combine the herbs, and solve the intricate facility puzzles, while Billy is just standing around holding a shotgun. You get to watch her actively earn her stripes in real time. She steps up not because she's a superhero, but because she has absolutely no other choice if she wants to see the sunrise. It makes her eventual appearance in the Spencer Mansion so much better. For years, fans joked about how tired and helpless she seemed when Chris finally found her, but after playing 0, it suddenly clicks. By the time the Alpha team even lands their helicopter in the woods, Rebecca has already run a 24-hour marathon of pure, unadulterated trauma. She wasn't just hiding because she was scared, she was hiding because she was running on absolute fumes. It's a brilliant bit of retroactive storytelling that turns a secondary character into someone who carried the weight of the entire prequel on her shoulders.
Rebecca!
The partnership in Resident Evil Zero isn't just a mechanical gimmick, it's a narrative collision between two characters who absolutely should not be working together. While Rebecca represents the by-the-book innocence of the STARS unit, Billy Coen is the ultimate early 2000s edgy wildcard. He's an ex-Marine lieutenant, sporting a massive tribal tattoo, on his way to be executed for a mass murder he claims he didn't commit. Throwing a teenage medic and a death row convict together on a train full of leech zombies is a ridiculous setup, but it somehow works. This cop and convict dynamic gives the game a layer of friction that earlier titles completely lacked. You aren't just managing two health bars, you're managing an alliance built on pure desperation rather than actual trust. Mechanically, Billy is the heavy hitter. He's the guy you push into the room first when you don't know what's behind the door. He can take a beating, his aim is steadier with larger weapons, and he doesn't get thrown across the floor every time a mutant monkey takes a swing at him. But it's the mystery surrounding his past that actually keeps the story moving forward. Throughout the facility, you start finding files and reports that slowly peel back the layers of his court-martial, making you question whether you're teamed up with a hardened killer or just another victim of the same corporate corruption that created the monsters you're shooting. There's a constant back and forth between the two that grounds the absolute absurdity of the situation. When Billy saves Rebecca from falling down a chasm, or when she refuses to leave him behind, it actually feels earned. Unlike the isolated radio-only banter of the original games, Billy and Rebecca's interactions make the prequel feel more like an actual character study. By the time you reach the final act, Billy stops being the prisoner and becomes the only person in the world Rebecca can actually rely on. It's a brilliant contrast to the lone wolf survival we're used to, proving that sometimes the best tool for survival isn't a grenade launcher, but the guy holding it.
Rebecca! Hang on. I'll pull you up.
Thank you.
Don't mention it. Just keeping my word. We promised to cooperate with each other. Remember?
When you look back at the early 2000s, the GameCube had this completely unearned reputation as the purple toy for kids. But if you actually own one, you knew it was quietly housing some of the most graphically intense games on the market. Resident Evil Zero was Capcom's way of flexing every single muscle that the console had, but because it was built specifically for that hardware, they were able to push the pre-rendered backgrounds to a level of detail that honestly still looks better than a lot of early PS3 games. The trick this time around was movement. Older games in the series relied on static, beautifully painted backgrounds that looked great but felt a bit like they were running around a museum diorama. Zero brought the environments to life. On the Ecliptic Express, you could see the rain lashing against the grass and running down the windows in real time. You had steam hissing from the floor gates and carriage lights swinging back and forth, casting shifting shadows across the walls. It made the entire world feel active and unstable. When you finally survive the crash and step into the Umbrella Executive Training Centre, the sheer opulence of the architecture hits you. It's a massive aristocratic facility full of polished marble floors, intricate wood carvings, and plush red carpets that look incredibly tactile. Seeing Billy and Rebecca rendered with textures so sharp you could read the patches on their uniform or see the individual lines in his tattoos running through these rich environments was absolutely mind-blowing for a 12-year-old. It's a testament to how powerful art direction can be. They didn't need a fully 3D rotatable camera to make you feel immersed. They just needed to paint the most beautiful nightmare possible and let you walk through it.
What is that?
Because Zero is a prequel, it had to justify its existence by showing us the messy, unrefined origins of Umbrella's research. The enemies here aren't the polished biological weapons we deal with in later games. They are the rough drafts, They are the violent, unstable mistakes that the company shoved into the basement before they perfected the T-virus. The poster child for this is the Leech Man. It's not just a zombie, it's a collective high mind of mutated leeches that physically clump together to mimic the shape of a human. The animation of a glistening puddle of slugs pulling itself up into the standing figure is a pure skin crawling body horror, and mechanically, they are a massive pain to deal with. You can dump handgun ammo into them all day, but they'll just keep stretching their wet, whip-like limbs across the room to grab you. You have to use fire, specifically Molotov cocktails, which ties horribly back into the inventory management system, because now you have to decide who is giving up precious slots to carry empty bottles and gas cans. Then there are the Eliminators. These are infected monkeys, and they are easily some of the most infuriating enemies in the classic era. They are fast, they attack in packs, and their erratic jumping makes them an absolute nightmare to track with standard tank controls. You'll walk into a room, hear a screech, and immediately start taking damage from an enemy that is bouncing off the walls before you can even aim your shotgun. Throw in a decaying, incomplete proto-tyrant that looks like it's literally falling apart at the seams, and you have an enemy roster that feels distinct from the rest of the series. You aren't fighting Umbrella's greatest hits, you're fighting the things they threw in the bin.
This is Delta Team. We have gained control of the train. Over.
Understood.
This does not make any sense. How was the T-virus leaked? And why did it contaminate both the lab and the mansion, as well as a train almost 3 miles away?
That's irrelevant. We must make sure no knowledge of this gets out. Destroy the train. Completely.
After the high-speed chaos of the train crash, you find yourself staring up at the Umbrella Executive Training Centre. It has the grand architecture you'd expect from the franchise's wealthy villains, complete with sweeping staircases and ornate statues, but the underlying vibe is entirely different. This isn't a residential estate, it's a corporate school. It was built to train the next generation of Umbrella executives, and that clinical utilisation purpose bleeds through the marble and the mahogany. Instead of feeling like a haunted house, it feels like an abandoned institution that rotted from the inside out. You're walking through lecture halls, testing facilities, and observation rooms where the company's darkest minds learned their trade. The layout itself is sprawlingly and specifically designed around the partner's app and system. It forces you to think in two places at once. You frequently have to split Billy and Rebecca up, sending one down a completely separate wing to operate a rusted winch or stand on a pressure plate so the other can grab a key item. It turns the geography of the map into a massive co-op puzzle box, but because of the lack of item boxes, that same geography quickly becomes your worst enemy. Every new floor you unlock isn't just a new area to explore, it's a massive distance you are going to have to physically haul your entire inventory across. Which brings us to the true horror of Resident Evil Zero, the logistics. Playing this game is essentially playing a very high stakes version of a warehouse management. Because you have no magical chest boxes to teleport your gear, you end up creating your own makeshift safe zones. The main hall of the training facility usually becomes the designated pumping ground. It starts off looking like a grand imposing lobby, and by hour 4, it looks like a teenager's bedroom floor covered in grenade launcher rounds, half-empty first aid sprays, and that bloody hookshot. This creates a massive pacing issue. You solve a difficult puzzle on the 3rd floor, unlock a new door, and realise the specific crest you need to open it is currently sitting on the floor of the basement. You aren't scared of the monsters on the way back down, you're just annoyed at the commute. It drains the tension out of the game. Instead of being a desperate survivor running for your life, you're a tired delivery driver retracing your steps to pick up a forgotten package. It heavily rewards players who can meticulously plan a route and remember exactly where they dropped every single item, but for everyone else, it turns a masterfully atmospheric game into a grueling test of patience. It's a bold experiment in realism, but it fundamentally clashes with the forward momentum that makes survival horror actually fun. Writing a prequel is always a massive risk, especially for a horror franchise. The scariest part of a nightmare is usually the unknown. When you start explaining exactly how the monsters were made, who signed the paperwork to fund them, and what the lab technicians had for lunch, you risk turning a terrifying mystery into a boring corporate HR meeting. Resident Evil 0 had to explain how the outbreak in the Arklay Mountains actually started, and Capcom's solution was to throw subtlety completely out the window. Instead of a quiet lab leak or a simple scientific miscalculation, the outbreak is revealed to be a highly orchestrated revenge plot by one of Umbrella's founding fathers, Dr. James Marcus. And he isn't just an angry old scientist holding a grudge. Because this is early 2000s Capcom, Marcus has been resurrected by his own experimental leeches, de-aged into a 20-something with flowing robes, and spends half of the game standing on cliffs in the pouring rain, singing opera to command his slimy army. It is gloriously, unapologetically absurd. It takes the grounded bio-horror we were used to and injects it with a massive dose of anime melodrama. Watching a guy in a robe direct traffic for a swarm of infected leeches through the power of song is a wild tonal shift. It almost shouldn't work in a game that takes its inventory management this seriously, but it's so over the top that you can't help but go along with it. This is also the game that finally gives us a look at the internal politics of Umbrella before the mansion incident. We get these cutscenes of a young Albert Wesker and William Birkin just standing around in the control room, watching monitors and bickering like middle management trying to cover up a colossal screw-up. It demystifies the villains a bit, showing them not as these untouchable masterminds, but as opportunistic corporate climbers who are just as panicked about the Leech situation as you are. Does the opera singing Leech wizard ruin the grounded horror of the series? Maybe a little, but it also gives the prequel a distinct theatrical personality. It reframes the entire timeline. What we always thought was just a tragic accident in a lab was actually the fallout of a messy, decades-long corporate assassination. It's ridiculous, it's campy, and it is peak Resident Evil lore. Resident Evil 0 was essentially trapped on Nintendo hardware, unless you kept your GameCube plugged in or bought the slightly tweaked Wii port. It was a lost chapter for a massive chunk of the fanbase. But in 2016, Capcom finally brought it to modern consoles with a HD remaster, and visually, it was a technical revelation. They took the gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds and managed to upscale them to widescreen. Because the original art was built in 4:3 aspect ratio, the remaster uses a clever pan and scan technique where the camera slightly tracks up and down the pre-rendered image as you move. It gave the environment a subtle sense of motion that wasn't there in 2002, and it proved that the original art direction was fundamentally bulletproof. But the remaster also brought a highly controversial new feature: the modern control scheme. Capcom knew that a huge portion of the modern audience simply wouldn't tolerate the tank controls. So they mapped the movement directly to the analog stick. Push up to go up, push down to run towards the screen. On paper, it made Billy and Rebecca feel much more agile, allowing you to instantly pivot and dodge these infuriating monkey attacks. The problem is, the game was never designed for it. The fixed camera angles in Zero change constantly and aggressively. You'll be sprinting down a carriage, pushing right on the stick, the camera angle will suddenly switch, and because your thumb is still holding the exact direction, your character will instantly do a 180 and run straight back into the waiting arms of the zombie you were just escaping. It turns what was supposed to be intense life or death chases into awkward slapstick routines where you were just violently vibrating back and forth between two camera cuts. Playing it today also shines a harsh spotlight on the partner AI. Back in 2002, we were a lot more forgiving when a companion got stuck on a piece of furniture or decided to empty a handgun clip into a wall. In the modern era, managing your partner's aggression levels feels like wrangling a toddler in a supermarket. You are constantly toggling their attack stance on and off just to conserve ammo, knowing full well that if you leave them to their own devices, they will absolutely waste your only incendiary round on a crawling zombie. Despite the control friction and the constant babysitting, the HD remaster was exactly what the game needed. It pulled Zero out of the obscurity and proved there was still a massive, hungry audience for its punishing, methodical style of horror. It didn't fix the inventory backtracking, but it made the misery look absolutely stunning in 1080p and 4K.
Hey, Queenie! Feast on this!
As the sun finally rises over the ruins of the Umbrella training facility, it marks more than just the end of Rebecca Chambers' incredibly long night. It marks the final sunset for the classic era of Resident Evil. Zero was the ultimate logistical extreme of the formula that had defined survival horror since 1996. It pushed the GameCube hardware to deliver environments so incredibly detailed, they felt like moving paintings. But in its pursuit of mechanical death, from the removal of the item boxes to the complex partner swap and logistics, it pushed the old school framework to its absolute breaking point. By the time the credits roll, it becomes gnarlingly obvious why the franchise couldn't continue down this path. The fixed camera angles and the tank controls had become victims of their own complexity. You can only add so many layers of inventory management before the dread of the monsters is entirely replaced by the dread of the logistics. This game stands as a beautiful, frustrating monument to a specific style of design that the industry simply left behind. It was the last time Capcom would ask us to navigate a nightmare through the rigid lens of a director's chosen camera angle. It proved that while the series was desperately in the need of the action-heavy revolution that Resident Evil 4 would soon bring, there is still something undeniably special about the slow, methodical mystery of this era. We've now documented the core Arclay incident, from the first leech on the train to the destruction of the underground labs, but as we step away from the main timeline for a moment, the franchise's experimental streak is about to take another strange turn. While the main development team was busy figuring out how to reinvent the wheel with Leon in Europe, a smaller, much weirder project was brewing on the PlayStation 2. Next time, we're leaving the forest behind and heading back out to sea. We're looking at Resident Evil Dead Aim. It's the next entry in the gun survivor lineage, but it actually tries to bridge the gap between third-person exploration and first-person light gun shooting. It's got a transatlantic setting on a hijacked ocean linear, a villain who wants to transform into a literal T-virus goddess, and some of the most bizarre hybrid gameplay in the entire series. The fixed cameras are officially gone, the crosshairs are out, and things are about to get very weird aboard the Spencer Rain. I'll see you on the next one.